Hello. So this is the fourth episode, I believe, of the English Embankment, and as usual, we start just well, first of all, because not everyone has this opportunity of watching every tour, and I also don't expect you to remember the details, so I just would like to start from where it begins, for you to kind of have an idea where we are. We are in the very heart of St. Petersburg. This is the famous Bronze Horseman monument to Peter the Great. Peter the Great, the founder of the city. It stands actually on the solid piece of rock. It used to be solid on its way while it was transported as it was being transported to St. Petersburg. In the 18th century, by the way, it cracked and now, if you look behind the monument, you will actually see the crack. So it was kind of glued together. But in general, it was one solid piece of rock, and the monument is standing on top of that rock. There you go. And behind it, yes, is the St. Isaac's Cathedral. It is one of the central squares, and the Nevsky Avenue and the Winter Palace of just about 5 minutes walk to the right hand side from here. On the other side, you see this is the Neva River. On the other bank of the river is the Vasilievsky Island, which was meant to become some sort of a small Holland with the canals instead of the streets. But that dream of Peter the Great was never fulfilled. He passed away, and everyone decided to quickly just forget about that big dream of Peter the Great. This is for you to what I'm showing you the old 19th century postcard. That's what it looked like from the Neva River. And to the very right side of this image, you can see the building with the columns. I mean, just part of the building. So this is the building of a Senate and a Synod, the two buildings where actually the English Embankment begins. So to the right side from here. Yes, exactly over there. And we begin walking. Just a quick reminder that this embankment is called so. It's its first name, by the way, because a lot of English ambassadors, businessmen, and people also hired by Peter the Great to help him build the fleet in early 1700s. So they just settled in this area because the first shipbuilding yard is like 5 minutes walk from the English Embankment. And all after that, the embankment changed its name multiple times. In the Soviet times, it was called the Red Fleet Embankment because of the red symbol of the Soviet Union, the Red Fleet, Soviet fleet, mainly because there were a lot of ships always docked along the banks in that area. And I will tell you about one very special ship docked there. And only after the perestroika in 1994, to celebrate the visit of the late Queen Elizabeth II, this embankment was given its original name. And this is how the circle was complete, so to speak. I'm just sharing a couple of photos from that visit. And obviously, the Queen visited all the important landmarks. And yes, she did the river cruise because everyone does. And that's basically it. So we have already seen a bunch of palaces. We even stepped inside the building to the left from the green one. But this starts with the green building. And the previous episode can be still watched on my YouTube channel. You can see that episodes and you can see the opulent interiors of the palace. The one with the lion's head, the yellow one. But we are starting with the house of a Bavarian councillor Mayor. Um, because this area is super central, you can only expect rich people, wealthy people, and people of status to be settling here, and that's exactly how it was. This is the Edward Mayer, who was the German chancellor, but he wasn't actually the first inhabitant of this neighborhood. Every house here has had at least five different owners, and most of them had even more. And it looked different. Most of these buildings, have been rebuilt several times. But in a nutshell, I could say that this is one of the oldest embankments in the entire city. However, the way this house looks nowadays is already the change, is the result of the changes that took place somewhat uh, 1880s, 1890s. This is an eclectic house. This color is quite unusual for St. Petersburg. There are not so many buildings in this shade, and it's the original color. That's why this house became sort of a landmark in the city. Obviously, I'm not sharing I would say, the biography of each house in detail from the beginning till the modern times. I'm just sharing some interesting stories of more and less known, personalities. For example, Friedrich Benjamin von Lütke. He was um, a traveler, a scientist, and also he contributed a lot to to the discoveries and studies of the Far Eastern territories and on the far northern territories of the Russian Empire. However, the interesting thing is that he didn't really have a formal education, so to speak, but he served. But his service in the army was impeccable, and he showed a lot of courage at different campaigns. And eventually, together with the Grand Duke Konstantin Nikolaevich Romanov, became the founders of St. Petersburg Imperial Geographical Society. And he took part in numerous expeditions, just described a lot of these expeditions, and his, I would say, impact and his input, his contribution to the socio-ethnographic studies of the diverse Russian empires, obviously, I would say, hard to overestimate. And now we don't call this society imperial, we call it Russian Geographical Society. But yes, in 1845, this is when it kind of officially opened, so to speak. It was officially established, 1845. And by the way, we saw the grave of Lutke in the Lutheran cemetery in St. Petersburg. I did the cemetery tour on Halloween. This recording is available for my sponsors. And well, if it's just one or two recordings you really badly want to see, you can always contact me and I will send you the link. This is not a big deal at all, just in case. By the way, this is the uh, headquarters of the Russian Geographical Society. This building was constructed, however, not in 1845, but way later. This is the turn of the 20th century, and you can see that by the decoration of the facade. And this building is still around, and I have been inside. It's quite an interesting building. I would say Art Nouveau-ish. And yes, the library still looks the same. Actually, in 2022, I was working on a short series of tours of different geographical discoveries. And I was even planning an interesting collaboration with one of the guides, my colleagues, on Hagel platform, where I started as a virtual tour guide. But and we were almost there, but the war got in the way and things went sour. So I never got around to it. Who knows? So I spent quite a lot of time at that library preparing, because many of those documents and descriptions of the travels of different Russian expeditions are not available online, but I was able to get them from the books. And I spent I would say quite a number of hours in that library. Anyway, so let's go on. And this building looks super official because it actually happened to be the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Russian Empire ever since early 19th century. Pure example of classicism, and but originally, by the way, yes, so you can see also a lot of I love sharing old photographs, old postcards. So the building looked different in the 18th century, but in the 19th century, it actually hasn't changed since the 19th century at all. I've never been inside. Almost all these buildings are actually inaccessible nowadays unless you work for one of those big financial corporations, or you work for the FSB, or you work for well, governmental institutions. So except for a couple of palaces that are museums, you actually cannot visit those. So I just rely on the photos and visual aids I find online. Sorry for the quality. These photos were taken, I believe, in 2010s. And well, it was originally in the 18th century. What I know that those were two buildings. When I looked at the map, I like looking at old maps as well, but I don't show them much because they are in Russian and they don't mean much to you because you don't read in Russian. It's not so easy to read in Russian. And I saw that there used to be actually two buildings in the 18th century, and then for the ministry need, they put together two buildings. They connected them, took down the wall in between, and this is how they made one big building of the two, and totally reworked the facade with the columns to make it look even more official. And I think it kind of worked. You can see this building in the sorry, let me just go. And you can see this building in this old postcards. It looks very much the same. There you go. I'm sure you can see that. I know you don't see the pointer when I when I when I share the screen, but you have the idea. Okay. Uh, Oh, from the other side, you can see the embankment of the Vasilevsky Island, and this is the Academy of Fine Arts. But what is more interesting here is the collection of ice. You see what's going on here? These people are walking on ice of the Neva River, so it used to get really cold in winters. It still does. But back in the days, it was much colder than today, and the water froze uh, like really well, and people just didn't need to use any bridges at all. They could just cross on the shore, I mean, on the ice. And this is where they also cut ice for water. The Neva water wasn't really that good quality. The cleanest water was normally in the Fontanka River, but more Neva River was also good. So this is how they sold water in blocks. This is where they saw ice and well, prepared it for sale, and then they would put it on sleigh and take it where they need it. So it was a colorized photograph as far as I understand. Nevertheless, so let's go on. And here we are looking at um, I would say the classic example of the upgraded buildings, the extended ones. You see two extensions here. I mean, the added floors. So the third floor and then the fourth floor. So the third level and the fourth level were added later. Originally, it would be two floors. Of course, in the 18th century, it was only two-floor buildings anyway. But later on in the 19th century, it could be more. As you know, there was I would say there was sort of a restriction in terms of how shall I put it, in terms of the how tall the buildings could be. They couldn't be just taller, and they couldn't be higher than well, we do it in meters, so like 20 something meters. Just basically, it just had to be lower than the Winter Palace. Well, but I would say that it was definitely the height of not a two-floor but three-floor building. That was basically it. Just that. So the English embankment 34. And here you can see next to the Russian flag, there is a red flag. It's not the Soviet flag. You can't see it from here, and I don't know if I have the whole flag, but you see they're part of an anchor. This is actually the flag of St. Petersburg. The flag of St. Petersburg has the two anchors, the sea anchor and the river anchor. This is a marine school. It's one of the buildings of the marine schools, and these lions have been here from the beginning. They are the guardians. There are a lot of lions in St. Petersburg in general. They are the guardians of the city, I would say. And this building belonged to Fondervis family, whose palace we're going to see immediately after I'm through with this tour. This is the photo of the interiors, but not of this house that I'm showing you. It's not the Marine School. No, Marine School doesn't have a concert hall of this splendor. This is the Fondervis Palace we're heading to in less than 40 minutes from now. So I'm just kind of teasing you a little bit of what we're going to see, and that's just a fraction of the interiors that they have to surprise us with in the Fondervis Palace. Sorry for the quality of this photo, it's not so good, but there is a much better one. There you go. So just for you to have an idea what kind of gorgeous palace we are going to explore after we are done with the English embankment. By the way, we're not going to finish today with the embankment. There are many more buildings to talk about. There's so this street is so English that there is even an Anglican church on that street, and there because also this street is so central. Apart from the English nobility or ambassadors, foreign embassies, and also apart from many other rich families living in this street, in this embankment over the course of this 300 years of the imperial times. Also, a lot of Romanovs uh, happen to have some real estate on this embankment. So we are going to talk about that as well. Now we are approaching the corner of the English embankment and the lib Labor Square. Well, this building also extended by one floor and then another floor. Typical example. This is the very end of the 19th century. The way the house looks, it's how it looks in the very end of the 19th century. But in fact, it was a much smaller building, a much more modest one. And now I would say it's a pretty curious example of eclectic architecture. Originally, it looked like this. So we're talking 18th century here. And it belonged to a noble family because who else? Um, and well, by the way, this is um, the old postcard from 18th century, black and white. So later on, this house was purchased in mid 19th century. It was purchased by von Larsky. He was a writer, um, and von Larsky asked the architect Bykovsky. Well, you see it here. So Mikhail Bykovsky, who originally was a Moscow architect, by the way. He's more famous in Moscow and the vicinity of Moscow than St. Petersburg. But for some reason, he was hired by von Larsky to rebuild the house. And well, yeah, that's von Larsky. He is not, his works are not studied in Russia. So he's, I would say, kind of really forgotten. Uh, I would say by Russian audience, but back in the 19th century, he was pretty big and well, quite famous. So he could afford living in the central area, like super central area of St. Petersburg. And this is the architect, by the way, Mikhail Bykovsky. The building was quite spectacular, but again, it didn't look like that in 1850s when it was rebuilt. But it looked very similar. Some details would be added later. And as you can see here, it has only 3 floors. Originally, it had 2. Bykovsky did add 1 more floor. And later on, some more details would be added. And originally, it was of this, I would say, typical yellow beige color with well, it's very typical for St. Petersburg. There are tons of buildings of this shade. And I mentioned Labor Square. However, it's called Labor Square nowadays. Back in the days, it was called Blagoveshchenskoye Square, the Annunciation Square, because the Church of Annunciation used to be standing in the heart of the square, and it was kind of their architectural dominance in this area. Well, but there's no church anymore. But what I have been able to find is the drafts that were left by the architect Bukowski. In most cases, we only have blueprints, and they are quite boring. So I like studying the blueprints to see which room was there, but they are in Russian and they're quite boring. So I normally don't share the blueprints. Um, well, in most cases, they are available as well. So you don't really need to go to the archives or, I don't know, submit special inquiry for that. But in this case, we have actually the drawings. So Bukowski left for us his sketches, and he also placed people in it. So I would say it's kind of an architectural comics, maybe in a way. These are artworks. It's not just some I would say some sketches, some drafts left by the architect. It looks very detailed, so it's clearly that Bukowski also enjoyed drawing them himself, I would say. So it's quite a rare thing. Quite a rare thing. Normally, it's just boring blueprints that we come across. Here, he really tried to share the vibe. Yes. So um, that's the corner of the building. Before it was rebuilt, that was photo taken. Well, that's actually what because he rebuilt it, and later on more details would be. Um, well, I would say looks just like almost any building in this area. This is the old photo. I like to look at how people are dressed. And this man wearing white coat or something, he was the guard of the bridge. There was always guards on the bridge for a number of reasons. And The bridge is called also Annunciation Bridge. It was named after the square, and the square, just to remind you, it was named after the church. Yes. So some old postcards, and you can see how many boats. It was always something docked along the shore. So it was always like that. From there, you could buy wood for your stoves. From there, you could buy fresh water, a lot of things. And basically, I would say the entire embankment would be the place for commerce, and also a lot of ships would be docked in the English embankment area because it was close to the shipbuilding yard. Okay, so the original color, as I said, was yellow, well, different shades of yellow, but now it's pink, and I'm not sure why. Well, nevertheless, this building was kind of, well, there is a souvenir shop now. However, having shops in this street was, I would say, mm, not comme for because it was the street of nobility, so just it just didn't seem right, to have shops there. But there was a store in this building, the corner store, where they sold different rarities and um, paintings and furniture, porcelain, and antiquities. So this type of store was okay for sure. This is a big building. It's kind of a and what do you call it? It's corner building, pretty big one. There was another store, so this was stationery store, Alfred Bloom and Company. And you see plus Благовещення, so Annunciation. That means Annunciation Square. So this is where they sold stationery products and all sorts of papers, items for painting, and I'm not sure what's written there. Anyway, just lovely postcard. It's just not an old photo that was turned into a postcard. Yeah. So that souvenir store is basically, it was, at least when I was a tour guide, it was one of the most expensive souvenir stores, and it had some jewelry and also antiquities for sale, which I would say I like this lineage from that uh, from antique store in the 19th century, turn of the 20th century. There is still, I would say, kind of high profile, affluent store still. Nevertheless, so this is the postcard taken from the Labor Square, but what it says here, upon the Nicholas Institute, well, because of the bridge in the end of the square, so that Annunciation Bridge was named after Nicholas in the 19th century. Well, briefly, because Nicholas first was the emperor who commissioned to build the bridge, and who was one of the, I would say, sponsors, and because he was an engineer, he also participated in the creation of the bridge himself. So I would say building bridges and railroads was an essential thing for the emperor. Let's put it like that. But I call it a labor square because if you can see this red palace, red building, this originally, well, let's put it like that. Originally, it was a palace that belonged to one of the Grand Dukes Romanovs. We'll be talking about it. And later on, it was sold to Xenia Institute, kind of an institute for the noble girls, kind of the educational facility for the noble girls. And in the Soviet times, it was called the House of Labor. Basically, it was sort of a concert hall for the workers of St. Petersburg. Oh, Leningrad, sorry. Not St. Petersburg, but Leningrad. Anyway, so, but let's get back to that, to the house, right? To this pink house with the caryatids, right? With these ladies, just standing by the wall. So, after von Nandarsky sold it, and they reopened several facilities, including a restaurant. And the restaurant is called Old Danon. Danon, it was a nickname of a chef. Danini was the name of the chef. So it was called Old Danon, it was just a name. And these are the photos uh, of of the redecoration. This is the redecoration process of the von Landarsky Palace, and they were turning it into the restaurant space. And the photos of, well, the clients, the visitors of the non-restaurant. That must have been some big corporate event, maybe a noble family event. I'm not entirely sure. But what I know is that Old Danon was one of those restaurants where a lot of Grand Dukes Romanovs would go on a regular basis, at least like once a week. And it was one of those, I would say, um, restaurants where you would be expected to go. Because well, if you were Romanov, if you were rich, if you were, I would say, a distinguished member of the community, you had to go there. And there were several restaurants like that. And well, the prices were extremely high. And also, it was the whole kind of a concept behind it. For example, the um, it was a, I would say, big trend. It was a custom to order a bottle of champagne and actually to never finish it. You couldn't order a bottle of champagne and have it all. You always had to leave something. That was the sign of kind of was a symbol of your wealth, something like that. So just imagine how much champagne was wasted. Yeah, and all that happened while the I would say 95% of the country was living in the drenching poverty, and Russian villages were in a very bad condition. And yeah, so basically, these people had no idea of what was going on in the entire country. So yeah, but nevertheless, I would say love the restaurant. A lot of things happened there. A lot of important connections were made there. And it was just known for its very good food. Like very good food. Everyone would go there. Everyone. I mean, those who could afford, all the nobility and all the merchants. So that's the same house. We're still talking about this house. And since I was able to find a photo of it after the Second World War times, after the bombings in during the siege, so I thought it would be a good idea to show it to you, just just as a reminder of all the restoration work. And well, it doesn't show from here, but it doesn't really look that pink. It looks, it appears as it was of, I would say, kind of brighter color. It doesn't really look pink because it was not, because it was yellowish, kind of. Well, you can see it here in this colorized postcard. It was originally black and white. So and right in front of us. So technically speaking, uh, from our back has to be the Annunciation Church. It was still there, and in front of us, if you look straight, there would be the palace, the Annunciation. Sorry, not the palace, the Annunciation Bridge. And this is once again, I'm showing you this artwork, this watercolor artwork. So we are standing on the bridge and looking at the square. Well, that red color palace, which I call Labor Palace, that's what it looks nowadays. And we actually did a virtual tour in the palace, the one that was renamed into a concert hall for the workers. The Labor Palace, otherwise it was called. We did a tour there, so I'm not really going into a lot of details. But what I want you to see, I like this photo because it shows a lot. So first of all, if you look to the left, you'll see the Neva River and have the idea why it's called the embankment. So the big Neva to the left. And you also see in the center, obviously, the palace, and you can see how big the palace was and still is. But right now, not everything belongs to the palace itself. So don't expect that the entire house belongs to different, well, it's kind of a concert hall. No, it's not like that. And also, if you look to the left from the palace, you will see the street, right? It starts exactly at the corner of this square-shaped pink building. So there is the street, and it goes parallel to the Neva River. So this is the Galerная Street, and this street is kind of, I would say, the back exit for all these homes that you can find on the English embankment. So basically, once we reach the Labor Palace, once we reach the Annunciation Bridge, we can see that we have seen half of the entire embankment, basically. Yeah. So, and by the way, in 20 minutes from now, we are heading to the Fontervis Palace. So the Fontervis Palace is exactly in that Galerna Street, to the left from the palace itself. And the palace is in the very center. Also, you can see a church building with an onion-shaped dome right behind this palace. That's because it was a home church, kind of, well, of the family. Even this palace was originally yellow. Later on, at some point, it was painted with red, just like the Winter Palace. But now the restorers decided to stick to this red color. Some photos from the inside, just to remind you what the interiors look like. So this palace, we're not going into detail since we had a tour there, but it was a long time ago, so it wouldn't hurt to remind you just a little bit, especially because I mentioned the Romanovs in connection with that. So this palace belonged to Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, and well, Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich had a wife, so Grand Duchess Alexandra Petrovna of Russia, and they seem to have been happily married until he met Ekaterina Chislova. Sorry, I forgot to put her name here. So Chislova, she was a ballerina. She was a ballet artist, and there was something with the Romanovs. They always had something for ballerinas. So Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich fell in love like head over heels, and uh, he lived in that palace together with his wife, but he made sure that Chislova, with their children, by the way, would settle down not far uh, from from the palace. So that's quite interesting, I would say. Nevertheless, that's the bridge, the Annunciation Bridge that we've been talking about. And we walked this bridge back in St. Petersburg times, and we also sailed under this bridge when it opened for the nighttime. Well, by the way, this is the first metal bridge ever constructed in St. Petersburg. 1861, it was inaugurated, and well, it we know we you know that the big bridges over the Neva River, they open every night to let big vessels sail through from the Gulf of Finland, the Baltic Sea, Gulf of Finland, through the Neva River, and then further down into the country. Well, there were a lot of different plans and the talks of building a permanent bridge started already in the 19th century, but there were no technologies available in the early 19th century. This is just an interesting um, scheme, the design that was absolutely, it looks very futuristic. There were no technologies back then to enable the engineers to build something like that. So I would say that that model was really ahead of times. But eventually the bridge was built, but it was essential for the bridge to open anyway because it works the same way both in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. This river was used for also cargo transportation, not just navigation, not just for fun, but also for cargo transportation, which means that the bridge from the very beginning had to be a grown-up bridge. However, the very first system, the very first design was that in the part of the bridge where I would say it's the east, where it's the least shallow, where it's the deepest. That's exactly by the side of the by the Vasilevsky Island, not from the English Embankment, but from the opposite shore. They would so the bridge would open sideways, and that's how it worked, and it worked perfectly, by the way. It worked perfectly, but it was not it was impractical, and eventually when they already developed the different system mechanisms of vertical opening, they switched to that. So this is the photo taken before the revolution. You can already see the trams crossing, but you see also the way the word is spelled. It has the old symbols. So this is clearly before the revolution, because after the revolution, there will be a reform of the Russian language carried out where this final letter year would be eliminated. That's one of the very first reforms carried out by the Bolshevik government. And exactly by the side of the Vasilevsky Island, there was placed a small chapel. It was called the Chapel of Nicholas the Wonder Worker, and it kind of, well, mirrored the Annunciation Church. Well, nevertheless, And by the way, and the chapel actually used to stand in the middle between the two wings of the bridge that would swing open left, right. And later on, after the bridge was rebuilt, the chapel would be placed to a little bit to the side. Let's put it like that. This is just for you to see the beautiful designs of the railings. And also, as you can see, there, well, I promised to show that there were a lot of ships docked as well there. Some of them, they were just waiting. Um, so the old shipbuilding yard would be to the left-hand side if you look at this image, so to the left-hand side. But there was also a new shipbuilding yard constructed in the end of the 20th century. So I'm not sure exactly what those ships were waiting for, but that's how it was historically. A lot of bridges will be parked, a lot of ships will be parked on the English embankment. Yeah. Another photo of the bridge. You see the concha. Concha, it was a horse-driven carriage. Normally, there had to be four horses that would be pulling the carriage, the car. It's called concha. And conchas were very slow. Conchas were heavy, and sometimes it took way longer to get somewhere by a concha than on foot, unfortunately. In St. Petersburg, we used to say "конка конка обгони цыпленка." It's kind of a, a rhyme, but basically it meant conquer, conquer, uh, like don't override like a baby chick. So, which meant that baby chicks were even faster than the conquers. Like four horses basically pulled in a carriage. Yeah. But it was so because at that point there was no electricity. Still, there were no trams yet. But shortly after, well, after a couple of, I would say, incidents when conquests were just too slow, it was decided to finally switch to electric trains. Anyway, so I'll show you this colorized photo. That's the photo of the Annunciation Church. This is the Labor Palace or Nikolai Nikolaevich Palace. Some more old photos, and then this would be it. So in the Soviet times, they would destroy the church, and they would turn it into like a basically a big crossroad, and that would be the area where, well, so we are kind of in the area where the old shipbuilding yard is to from one side, and from the other side the new shipbuilding yard was constructed, and in the middle was the Marine History Museum of St. Petersburg. This photo is, I would say, very dark and very disturbing because this photo was taken in 1818. That means this is already the beginning of the Civil War, and this is already after the revolution, and that arch looks so surreal. Well, but in fact, this is the arch through which the workers and well, people who participated in the storming of the Winter Palace and the revolutionary events, they would be entering the city from the workers' side. Well, because well, you know that the powerhouse of the revolution, the workforce of the revolution was the workers, right, of different factories, the most, I would say, discriminated and underprivileged, deprived communities of St. Petersburg. So, and not only St. Petersburg, obviously. And um, uh, the um, the revolution actually started not in the English embankment and not by the Winter Palace, but it actually started in in the suburbs where a lot of factories and industrial facilities were located. And one of the ways for the revolutionary powers to reach the center was actually this bridge, was the Annunciation Bridge. So it was important to greet the workers, greet the new triumphant, so to speak, through these, through the arch placed exactly by the bridge. We'll be talking more about this bridge. We'll be talking more about the revolutionary events for sure, but most probably on the second tour. Okay, so now just a little bit more from the other side of the bridge. I mean, from the right hand side, there is this building. There's not much stories here. It used to belong originally to to an English shipbuilder, but it looked way small. It was way smaller and a lot modest. Further on in the 19th century, it became the property of the empire, and here was placed one of the facilities that dealt with the activity of the shipbuilding yard, basically. So it's like one of those marine schools, marine offices, and blah, blah, blah. You can see it there because of the St. Andrew's flag. That is a white with the with the blue cross. So this is the continuation of the English embankment still. And if you look at this image, you will see that the embankment kind of stops with a big, like really high, well, tall building. Well, and that area also can see some chimneys. So that's already some industrial facilities that deal with shipbuilding, that deal with port activities and everything. But this is the area that was built in the 19th century, I would say. Yes. And in the 18th century well, uh, it's behind us. The big shipbuilding yard is behind us, the old shipbuilding yard. Okay, so I think we'll talk about just one or two buildings and then we'll go on a short break because there is another two happening. Well, this building, I would say it's an interesting example of how um, how expensive and absolutely unaffordable the real estate in St. Petersburg was. Um, well, real estate was always extremely important, and obviously it was always a good way to invest. However, very few people in the country could actually afford owning at least, even a room, let alone an apartment or a house. So, but Ivan Nastasyev could afford that. Ivan Nastasyev was originally from Siberia, from a small town of Tomsk, and uh, he happened to have discovered several gold deposits and some gemstone deposits in Siberia, and he managed, because he had brains and kind of a flair, for the entrepreneurship. He managed to build the gold mine and the facility, so he became filthy rich quite quickly, and his business was running smoothly and things were looking up. So he obviously could afford, and he did buy this house. So we call it the Astashev house. There's not so much information about Astashev himself, not so much interesting, but the interesting thing is that um, this house, before Astashev purchased it, let's say it cost like 100,000 rubles. I'm talking like old money, right? It has nothing to do with the modern day ruble, like nothing to do at all. And so that was the price when the previous owner, before Astashev, so that's the price that the previous owner gave for this house. About a decade later, Astashev bought this house from that previous owner, and he paid. So according to some sources, I didn't see the receipt myself, but some sources like 8 times as much. Some sources claim he paid like 10 times as much money as it was before, like 10 years before. So it kind of shows you uh, how expensive the real estate was in that area, and that's exactly so. Okay, I think this is where we wrap this up because I want to have a little more time before the next tour. And I scheduled this tour. I try not to schedule tours back to back, but sometimes so not to overlap with my colleagues, I have to do that. So sorry for that. I know it's inconvenient, so that's why I'm wrapping up a little earlier. Plus, I owe you a Q&A. Okay, so the chat is back on. Um, and I'm so sorry. Well, Cindy, hi, dear Robin. I also understand that you joined a little later. So all those who joined a little later, hello. Hi, Cynthia, Robert, Kelly, you've been here, I mean, from almost from the beginning. You may have seen a live stream that I did earlier today. That was a one-off thing, totally unexpected. I found out about a Christmas charity fair held, well, that had to happen on the 29th of November. I learned about it like last night, and I wasn't sure whether they would let me live stream from there because it's an international fair. There are different embassies that are based in Tbilisi. So I wasn't sure whether I would be able or not. So today at about 12, I came to that event, and I was given permission to live stream. So it was all quite unexpected. And I didn't really have time to promote this event. I didn't even schedule anything on Eventbrite. So I just shared on my socials and on the Facebook groups of our community. So I'm sorry. And I was also earlier than usual. And for many of you, it was just way too early. So I totally understand. So it's okay if you missed it. You can catch up on it. It's going to be available for the entire week. The organizers were absolutely okay with me filming it and leaving it in open access. So it's totally okay if you missed it. So there's nothing to be confused. It wasn't something that I had announced. I wish I knew about it. Well, I just kind of missed out on this just because I was so, it's been quite an overwhelming weekend, but it was okay. And I mean, the entire week has been pretty busy. So I'm sharing here all the links, including that live stream recording from the Christmas event. And that was the first Christmas event of the year. So I'm kind of now in the right mood, so to speak, and hopefully I'll be able to keep this mood till the very end. We'll see to the very end of the year. So this Christmas charity fair, the link is there. So we had almost no issues, just a little bit in the beginning, but then it went quite a lot of fun. I think I'm still a little bit hangoverish from that vodka. I drank again at work. What can I say? So in 5-ish minutes from now, we're going to the Fondervis Palace, like super opulent palace, basically like 2 minutes away from where we are now in the English Embankment. Then also after 1 hour break, I'm looking forward to catching up with you in the whimsical stone island of St. Petersburg. We're going to see more fantabulous architecture. And then I'm taking you to the Romanov residence in Peterhof, Alexandria. Not the one in Egypt, but in St. Petersburg. Tomorrow, 3 tours, an interesting live stream from Tbilisi. I'm going to take you to one more secret spot, a beautiful spot, historic building, very Georgian, just a lovely space. I've been given permission to live stream from there, so we're going there hopefully. Then Misha's gonna be giving another talk on Russian literature. Mikhail Lermontov, who was the poet and the writer of also Romantism period. And he also was a big fan of Georgia, of Tiflis, of the Caucasus. And there is a street named after him, by the way, in Tbilisi. So he's still a big deal here, I would say, like Alexander Pushkin. And then I'm taking to Jerusalem again to the Temple Mount because we haven't covered everything. There's so much more to talk about. And you have all the links here, my PayPal to buy me a coffee, my YouTube channel. And yeah, so I hope to see you in a couple of minutes from now in Fondervis Palace. Thank you so much for joining me. Happy Thanksgiving again to all those who have been celebrating. I have so much to be grateful for, and thank you for everything as well, for all the support and interest in my tours. So I'll see you very soon in St. Petersburg again with a different link in Fondarvis Palace. Thank you so much, and bye bye.